this first session, we explored the dynamics between missile defense and strategic risk reduction, and the speakers really emphasized the various dimensions of these issues. Of course, they questioned the efficiency of defense by looking at different recent examples. They also looked at how defensive capacities, but also long-range strike systems can play a role for Europe in terms of defense and deterrence. But they also addressed the risks that these systems can pose, risks in terms of escalation, in terms of stability, but also the question of cost that is also very important. So in the end, we talk about the normative framework and how it can adapt to the situation. But it was an excellent conversation to kick off this consultative meeting.
We just finished the session on outer space security at the EUNPDC Consultative Meeting. We talked about many things. We talked about multilateral efforts to try and prevent an arms race in outer space. We also talked about keeping the human in the loop and what effects a nuclear test would have on us humans here on Earth. We talked about legal efforts and about the distinction between dual use and dual purpose objects in space, as well as technological developments in space and missile defense. We mentioned the Golden Dome and what implications that would have on the strategic landscape in outer space. We hope for many more interesting sessions during today's meeting.
So we have just finished a very interesting and thought-provoking session on rising tensions in South Asia. And I think we have been able to shed some light on the main lessons that can be drawn from the latest India-Pakistan conflict and the regional ramifications, the importance of the nuclear factor, what role this factor has played in the conflict so far, and particularly in the latest crisis, and the general broader evolution of the strategic balance in the area, concentrating in particular on China-India relationship and the role of external powers, and what can be done to increase bilateral confidence building and security measures for between the two countries, and also the role that the external powers can play in mediating between the two countries in peacemaking efforts. There have been different perspectives on all these issues, and it was, I think, very interesting to compare and confront those perspectives.
So I have the honour of chairing the last session of today, which looked at the challenges of illicit arms proliferation in Syria since the collapse of the Assad regime at the end of 2024. We had 4 excellent presentations that kind of detailed the complexities of the situation as it is now in Syria in terms of the different armed groups that are present in the country. We also heard about patterns of illicit trafficking prior to the fall of the Assad regime, and also patterns of illicit trafficking since the fall of the regime, and also learned about some kind of previous cases of regime collapse and what they tell us about the risks that these situations pose, both for the country concerned and the wider region. But I think most importantly, we had some excellent recommendations for action that the EU and EU member states can take in order to both kind of strengthen the capacity of the current government in Syria, but also neighbouring states, particularly Lebanon, as they tackle the kind of fallout of the collapse and the looted stockpiles. And kind of tying together these issues of both kind of security-focused interventions to interdict weapons, or to manage stockpiles or destroy stockpiles, but also community-based efforts to kind of tackle the drivers of proliferation and the community insecurities that can be a kind of driver of illicit proliferation of weapons. So great presentations, great discussions, and really solid and useful policy recommendations.
We had a very interesting session this morning looking at trends in global arms markets. So first of all, we're looking at the trends in the global arms trade. Notably, the US is still the biggest arms supplier by far. followed by France, Russia, and China, and the EU combined are providing many arms to the world. But also the EU has become a very substantial arms importer, and the EU has substantially increased its arms imports. And that's something that's really interesting when you look at the fact that the EU wants to be independent and autonomous with regards to arms production. They still rely quite heavily on foreign suppliers for weapons, in particular actually the United States for certain weapon systems. Then we also looked at supply and demand developments in the European arms market. So the substantial increase in military spending, but that's also uneven across Europe. There are some countries, especially Eastern European countries, that provide a lot of spending for equipment, up to 8-fold. And then thirdly, we were looking at the small arms trade, which sometimes gets forgotten, but it's a really important issue, as we see when we have firearms and shooting incidents. What's interesting there is that you don't have the same data for small arms as we have for major conventional weapon systems. So we still have a big data deficit, but at the same time, we also have a new problem, which is the problem of fake news. So we have disinformation with allegations about small arms trade and small arms diversion. So one of the big challenges now is how to counter diversion.
So the sessions dedicated to dual-use items, and more specifically to unlisted items. If I have to highlight, I would say 3 main elements. The first one is where to draw the line. Where to draw the line when we talk about annexes, listed items, what it means, or to draw the line. I mean, the other one I would like to highlight from the discussion we have, which is export control is not anymore a classic instrument to fight proliferation. It starts to be as well some kind of economic tools used by state and authorities to do something. And lastly, I mean, the term was used quite a few times. We used the term agility. What means agility? Agility of the system. We could not allow ourselves to keep on with the classic way of adopting rules, implementing it, and waiting. So we have to be a bit more proactive.
Today we've heard how drones are no longer just surveillance tools, but they have become central to modern conflicts, from precision strikes to shaping entire battlefields. They are cheap, accessible, and fast, transforming both state and non-state warfare on land, at sea, and even underwater. Yet, regulation, accountability, and defense are struggling to keep pace, with major powers falling behind, and African conflicts already showing the risks and dangers of dependence, escalation, and civilian harm. The message is clear: drones are here to stay, but how governments and regions choose to govern, control, and adapt to them will determine whether they remain merely disruptive or dangerously destabilizing.
Is the military use of quantum technology real, or is it a hype? While our panel couldn't give a definite answer, we came to the conclusion that there's a strong potential for military use, but also for the use in arms control. So we can, as with other emerging technologies, not say whether the use of quantum will have in the overall negative effects or at least some positive effects. So we have to monitor closely, and it's a very interesting topic given the very technical background. And yeah, it was great to have all the experts on board to debate the issue.